devo usare quell'altro? Ok. Quindi parlo in italiano. Benvenuti. Good afternoon to everybody to this session which is titled Situations Endangering Tolerance in Europe. So we have four different presentations, and we decided to for 15-18 minutes and then 5-10 minutes of questions. Is it good for you? Okay. Okay. And so I don't want to use the time, and I will go in presenting our first two speakers. They're Luis Baptista and Ines Vieira of the Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Portugal, and their presentation is titled Frontiers and Diversity in Metropolitan Context, the Case of Cape Verdeans in the Lisbon Metropolitan Area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speak with this one? Okay.
No, it's the other one, sorry.
Okay. Hello, good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to tell you it's a great pleasure to be in Bologna city. It's my first time here in this university, one of the oldest, maybe the oldest one in Europe, so it's my pleasure to be here. And at the same time to say it's my first time in these meetings of Allmeet. As coordinator of the Portuguese team, that's a great pleasure to know you and have the opportunity to have a little more discussion about these subjects I had not the opportunity before to do with you. So our text and the idea of making this presentation is to just give you some ideas about our work and how it could be connected with this discussion. This session is about situations endangering tolerance in Europe. And we'll start with the idea of metropolis that can be seen as metropolis as a meaning of mobility. And this is quite important because when we think about the modern big cities, means the metropolis, let's call it metropolis to simplify, it means that we're living in societies that are a reflection about a globalization process, and the globalization process, one of the most relevant elements is precisely the power of the big cities, and now they concentrate not only people but all activities. And there are a lot of well-known studies like Sashi Assassin books about global cities that clarify exactly what it means, the importance of the globalization, and now the people around the world are more and more concentrated in big cities. It's not new, but the condition is to have more powerful places for these spaces. It means that the space of the cities just was enlarged in terms of involving surrounding places, the old fields, the campagna, that changed completely in terms of the condition of the activities and the places that now are also living in an urban style of life. Let's say that urban way of life, it's now becoming completely dominant, as we could say, globalized. It means also that when you have this process of enlarging the space of cities, there are new frontiers to define the place of each social groups. It means that it's not a question only for ethnic problems, but also for cultural and social problems. Big cities are the prior, let's say, context to observe population diversity. And this is so relevant that, in fact, the majority of the work about ethnicity and all the contexts about multicultural education are normally placed in big cities. Of course, this is something that affects all the activity, human activity, and so the idea of mobility is so relevant because precisely nowadays mobility is not only immigration or migrations, but as you may know, tourism move more people than migrations, if you quantify that. So mobility is global. Urban cities like Bologna or Florence, you know very well the importance of the presence of tourists. And so, of course, we have, while living in a global, let's say in the context of global mobility. That's why we have this process of inclusion at one side and exclusion at the same time when you speak about metropolis. Metropolis includes and excludes at the same time. So it creates what we can say mixed feelings about metropolis. The fear of metropolis by one side, the idea of insecurity, the problems about our personal situation when we moving from a place to another, and the sense of freedom that nothing substitutes, as you know, the freedom of being in a big city and be free in a big city, doing whatever we want. Well, these ideas are quite relevant, and it seems a little far from what we're discussing now, but I'll try to go further to the point. There is, by one side, coexistence and identities. It means that we have several big number of different social groups, ethnical groups, cultural groups, national groups living together. But that promotes, by one side, identities. Because in many countries, it's possible to find ethnic neighborhoods where people even have specific ideas about how to organize themselves, sometimes in conflict with the dominant ideas of this society. But at the same time that these identities are promoted by that way, there is a production of a sense of a security that is based on the idea of difference. Mixopholy, as it was called by Bauman, about the idea of the fear of the difference. And so this is quite relevant to understand what we are speaking about. Just one word about Lisbon metropolis area, because this is what we're speaking about. Well, be welcome to Lisbon, now just by images, but you are always welcome to come precisely. There's a flight direct from Bologna to Lisbon. And Lisbon was a small city in the 70s, even it was the capital of a sort of empire. But it was a small city in 1970. In the 50s of the 20th century, it started a process of expansion to the periphery. It means city starts to grow very significantly. And this development was the base of the present metropolis. It's a very small metropolis. 2.5 million, it's a small metropolis in the international context, we know that. Anyway, it changed completely the way that the relation between city and the rest of the country. And with the city and the rest of the metropolis, that was completely involved in this process of what we call in sociology metropolization. It means that it was involved in a process for let's say, quick urbanization. And this growth was based in that idea, that's the last one before I give the word to Inês. It's that there are two main moments. Since the end of the 19th century, we have internal important migration. It means people from the rest of European territory was coming to Lisbon. And even it was during the period when Portugal had colonies in Africa, but in that period, almost there was no people from these parts of these new countries coming to Portugal. The majority of migrants that made Lisbon so important that 10% of all population of the European territory was concentrated in the city, in the municipality. It meant just to show the importance of this concentration. And in these periods, until the 60s, 70s, migrations was mainly internal migrations from people from other regions of the country. In the 60s, 70s, started to have what some call the comeback of the caravela. Caravela is the boat that the Portuguese made the discoveries, as you may know. and start to come first the Cape Verdeans that Inês will speak about, and then the people from these all other new countries like Angola, Mozambique, Guinea, that came to Portugal as immigrants, now from the new countries. But many of them are Portuguese because they were born Portuguese, because they were born before 1974, before the independence of these countries. So in fact, is that internal migrations or international migrations? We are not absolutely sure about it. In fact, this is new countries that in common have the language, the Portuguese language, but with completely different social and economical structures in these days. So what is relevant to you is to understand that our metropolis basically grow with migrants from countries that became from former colonies. In the 90s and in the beginning of the 21st century, let's say in the 2000s, came the Brazilians that were, as you know, independent much before, but decided to use the European platform to start to come to Europe. So now the most relevant group of immigrants in Portugal are Brazilians. And the second ones are the Cape Verdeans. During a period, I won't have time to speak about it, from the ends of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, we had intense migration from Eastern Europe, based mainly in the big events that were created during this period. Namely, as you may know, the Expo 98, that was the big event that we had in Lisbon. It means that that migration was not permanent. Many of these people went away, but in fact there was just a period that would say of growth, enormous, huge growth of migration for Portugal. That now it's completely inverted. If you took some attention to the presentation of Vasil, it's the only country, Portugal, that now has an enormous difference between emigration and immigration. Now we are much more emigrants than immigrants. In the last 3 years, 300,000 young people left the country, what for us is a tragedy. So this is the base for our intervention. Now I give the words to Inês to start concentrating the Cape Verdean migration.
Good afternoon to you all. So before entering directly to the Cape Verdean community, I would like to present some visual mapping on the residential distribution of foreign people in Lisbon metropolitan area. This is a prediction for, this was the data from 2001, but it didn't change that much. Through the history of immigration in Portugal, Lisbon metropolitan area has been the main host context, both to the most and least qualified immigrants. Containing more than 50% of the country's immigrants, it is also the context in which migrant-related integration problems can be better observed in Portugal. In certain urban neighborhoods, like the ones where African immigrants live, so that one, up in your right, the problems of ethnicization of poverty and exclusion are a realistic threat. Yet, nowadays it is important to observe that these neighborhoods mix many different ethnic groups, including Portuguese people. They are nonetheless spaces of concentration and segregation. Not at the ethnic level alone, but due to degraded housing conditions, economic disadvantage, and social deprivation. This means that the center of the problem is not only the existence of ethnic neighborhoods or ghettos. The question is that the segregation of poverty, degraded urban and social spaces do condition the opportunities of its inhabitants. But through this image, we can conclude that this is not a case for all migrant groups, and this is important also for this discussion of migrations and mobilities. Mobilities include a range of different types of people, and migrant groups have different levels of advantages and disadvantages, and we can see it not only, but also through the residence distribution. Indeed, people from Portuguese-speaking African countries, despite sharing the language, are those most affected by poverty concentration spaces. Brazilians present more diversity, but a significant part of the community follows the same pace. Eastern European groups somehow occupy the least pressured, mildly disadvantaged spaces in Lisbon metropolitan area. The first Europeans follow a very different path. For example, you see in the bottom left map. They are mainly concentrated in the richest areas of the coastline, where we also can find private schools of certain European languages, among other types of services. Entering and presenting a little bit the context of Cape Verde. This republic is an island country constituted by 10 islands in 2 groups, considering the direction of the wind. They were not habited before they were discovered and colonized by the Portuguese people in the 15th century. The colonialism here lasted for 511 years. Cape Verde became a trading center for slaves and later an important stop for ships, both for coaling and for resupply in the whaling and transatlantic endeavors. The country's political history in the 20th century has been marked by the country's independence in 1975, by the tentative interest in unification with Guinea-Bissau, which is one of the Guinean countries in West Africa, and the one-party system established and maintained until finally, in the 90s, a multi-party elections began. The country has suffered from repeated droughts, which caused significant hardship and prompted heavy emigration, followed by the establishment of strong migrant networks. Therefore, Cape Verde's diaspora population is bigger than its domestic population. Okay. Only to highlight that the flow, you can see by this graphic, table, the flow of Cape Verdeans in Portugal had its origin more than 100 years ago, but its stronger numbers began after 1986, the year when Portugal entered the European Economic Community. And Professor Batista already explained some of the reasons for this. Presently, we have Brazil as the first group, Cape Verde as the second, and almost at the same numbers, Ukraine as the main groups in Portugal and also in the Lisbon metropolitan area. So, from the 2021 interviews I've already developed in my PhD project, I found three groups inside the Cape Verdean group, so to say. The first one can be located in the city center and in other parts of the city of Lisbon, where most of the former colonial workers and their children now live. They came to Portugal mainly around the 1970s, but also before, reacting to the former colony's independence procedures. Many of them descended from Portuguese people who were sent or decided to work in Cape Verde. And many of them, for example, are white people, which are very much distinguished from the majority of the population. They miss the Criollo language, and so they meet at least once a week in this association to find other Cape Verdeans, mainly old people from 65 to 80 years old. They organize many events. This one was during the 40th anniversary of the Cape Verdean independence. And they feel connected in the Cabo Verdeanidade, which could be translated as the Cape Verdean substance. Nonetheless, they can be considered, and they are in fact considered by other groups, as the long-standing elite, as a difficult group to distinguish from the old public workers, administrators, and officials of the colonial times. A second group is also a first-generation migrants, so to say. Younger people who came to study or work in the city, yet some live in the periphery, or at least know very well the conditions of living in the periphery of the city, because most of them have long networks and family in the periphery. In this picture, you can see a journalist, theater trainer, she's focused in forum theater or theater of the oppressed, and a high school teacher. They met to debate intersectional topics such as the rights of African women in host countries. These young women, as also many other young adults, working, for example, at the National Center for the Support to Immigrants, which people coming to the visit in Portugal might know, come to study and decided to remain. The third group, this is the last one, then it's only final remarks. The last group is the most numerous and stigmatized group. It is the group of the outskirts, of the periphery, and the poor neighborhoods. The photo is from Bairro do Alto da Cova da Moura, where the majority of the residents are, and descendants are immigrants, mainly from Cape Verde, with a low social economic status and social professional status. The stigma results from their social status, but also from racial questions, conscientiously refusing the elements and therefore resulting in a Cape Verdean culture of resistance, so to say, conscientiously refusing the elements of the dominant culture, particularly the Portuguese language. And this is true also for groups who were born in Portugal, so for the second and third generation, who were born in Portugal, and yet many of them refused to speak in Portuguese. And with a feeling of frustration and pessimism towards the existing opportunities in Portuguese society. There was a specific episode on police repression very recently, in February 2015, which put this neighborhood again in public discussion. I will pass now to the final remarks. Deixa eu fazer os final remarks.
No, very quickly, because we are without time. The 3 points to final remarks. The first one to say that the richness and the fear of metropolis, in the context of fragmentation of the metropolitan space, neighborhoods many times function as social frontiers. This is one of the things to be involved in this panel about situations endangering tolerance. This is one of the main questions. But at the same time, public spaces are crossing points where different groups meet, and public policies continue always to consider public space as a way to stimulate coexistence. This is basic for the future of our big cities, and not only big cities, small cities, and all the other contexts. Lisbon is a multicultural metropolis, as you can see. There are the diversity of communities, and as you could hear from Inês, even in one community, ethnic community, you have so big differences between the groups that it's very difficult to classify ethnic condition to a certain social condition. It can be very dangerous to classify ethnical condition with social condition, what happens a lot of time in many stereotypes, as you know. Finally, this coexistence in identity promotion, it's moving at the same time. We say it's so good to be together. It exists at the same time that we have the production of the sense of insecurity towards the different. We have to face that as a dilemma that we are facing every day, and that is not solvable. We need to care about that and find new solutions. And this post-colonial complexity, in Portugal, in Lisbon particularly, we have this question of sharing language, but in fact there are new relations between former colonies and Portugal, what put new questions that we have to answer. And finally, space and class distances design a single national foreign community, as I told you, that give us the the needs to deep our research to continue to understand better these questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So much, it's perfect. We have just time for one or a couple of questions just to break the speaking mood. I just want perhaps to ask you something. Perhaps we can just go more deep at the end. But you said that Deborah works as social frontiers, just producing groups and very ethnic identified community, but at the same time public space is a space for social encounters. So I have a question which is typically educational. Do we need policies to, how to say, improve that is public space as a space for, encounters, and to avoid one, or can we let just things go in a kind of ethnographic observing things happening? This is the difference between being a sociologist and being an educationalist. So I just put this, not to answer now, but perhaps at the end of the slot, and then I give the turn to Stephen McKinney. Do you need to? Yeah,
Yes,
I think
yes.
yes.
Okay.
For his.
Do we stay here? Or do we go
I
on?
think that you can. We need.
Lots of people.
So
Hold
Stephen
your band.
McKinney has a slot of 30 minutes for two presentations. The second one is with a colleague of him, and so we decide to go to the first, the second one, and then have some questions on both. So the first speech is titled "Songs of Darkness and Disgrace: Sectarianism in Glasgow." Thank you. So in the up, do you want to go to the big screen?
Yeah.
So this is the icon.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here in Bologna, the University of Bologna. Thank you to the scientific committee, to the organizers, to the presenters. It's been a wonderful day. We've heard many wonderful presentations. I'll speak slowly because the Scottish accent is very pure and quite difficult for people to understand. Buongiorno, grazie a tutti, grazie a professore Morena, dottore Federico Zannoni, miei amici ruschi, grazie a professori e studenti dell'Università di Bologna. Grazie tutto. Our first this is a quick map of Scotland. You'll notice that England is coloured grey. That's because it's a very grey place. Now, we don't have a great deal of time, so I'm going to talk round the slides. You can read the slides, or you can read some of the works that we have produced. Sectarianism is a highly problematic and highly difficult and highly complicated concept in Scotland. Much of the work I have done over the last 15 to 20 years is to attempt to reconceptualize sectarianism. One of my main theses is that sectarianism is under-conceptualized, with the result that it becomes one of those words that we think we know what it means, but in truth, we do not share a common meaning. So this is my very short, and I mean short, definition or description. I have a much longer one which runs to about a page, which I'll give to you later. Sectarianism refers primarily to intolerance between a number of different groups within the same religious faith. This can lead to hostility and possibly even violence. Can lead to and possibly, not necessarily. In Scotland, in our context, it refers primarily, but not exclusively, because there is evidence of sectarianism within the Muslim community in the city of Glasgow. So it refers primarily to Catholic and Protestant Christians. The use of the word Catholic and Protestant I'm using very, very broad terms to describe a range of people who are either religiously observant or who have some very, very kind of fragile affiliation or some kind of connection to one of these two Christian denominations. The Scottish government calls it a hate crime. I'll come back to that. I think that's very unhelpful. Very quickly, the roots of contemporary sectarianism between Catholic and Protestant Christians in Scotland can really go back to post-Reformation, early 19th, mid-19th century. During that period, a large number of Irish Catholics emigrated, well, actually they fled a series of famines in Ireland. Some of them went to America. Many of them were attempting to get to America and ran out of money, so ended up in Scotland, ended up in places like Glasgow. Be very clear, these were people escaping deprivation, famine, and possible death. 1 million people died during these series of famines. They came to cities in a country that were already dangerously overpopulated. They came looking for work. They came looking for somewhere to stay, but they clashed with local culture in a number of ways. Number one, they clashed with the local Presbyterian Protestant culture, which is quite vehemently built on anti-Catholic principles. They provided a serious challenge for education and school system, and of course, they provided, although we're moving in the mid-19th century to the late 19th, early 20th century, the Industrial Revolution, they provide competition for jobs, and this is always highly problematic. I'm going to fast forward. I'm sorry, I don't have much time. The depression between the two world wars in the 20s and 30s proved to be a particularly ugly part of Scottish history. The Church of Scotland, the established church of the country, at their annual meeting moved that anybody of Irish descent should really be repatriated. And this was clearly a vicious combination of racism, sectarianism, and intolerance. What they wanted to do was basically repatriate people who are maybe second or third generation, who probably at this point consider themselves to be Scottish. This is what happens in times of economic crisis. You blame the most recent migrants. In the last big crisis we had in the 80s and 90s, not the present one, it was very interesting. One of my Muslim friends said, I suppose we will be blamed. We'll be blamed for this crisis, and we're the ones that people will want to repatriate. And I said, rightly as it turned out, no, they'll blame the Poles because they're the last ones in. That's exactly what happened. Let's have the Polish people repatriated because they're taking the work, the jobs, and the houses that belong to Scottish people. I won't go through all of this, just to say that by the 50s and 60s, this all died down. And as we see from the census, I've got two census results here from 2001, 2011. The Church of Scotland population is decreasing. The Roman Catholic remains the same. However, health warning, please. I am very interested in statistics. These are government statistics where people self-identify. The Catholic Church has its own statistics, and they would claim, actually, we've only got about 637,000 people, and of that, we've only probably got 160,000 who are religiously observant. So we need to be very careful with these statistics. Let me go back to what I said at the beginning. Hate crime. I think this is very, very problematic. What does it mean? Sorry. This is just a quick slide explaining the difference between sectarianism in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Many of the people I work with, many of the people I speak to, many of the people who publish my work say, would you write something comparing the two? I've started to do this. These are quite different expressions of sectarianism. Northern Ireland is very different. In Scotland, we have no geographical segregation. And if you go to the city of Belfast, the city is split in two. The Catholic half, the Protestant half. We don't have this in Scotland. We have had no sustained armed conflict. We might have had a couple of occasions where people may have been injured or maybe even killed for sectarian motives, but we have had no armed conflict, and that's really important. The third point is the voting patterns are different. We don't have a Catholic political party. You don't have a Protestant political party. We have political parties, and the vote is very mixed. And finally, the school system is very different. Catholic schools were not funded by the state up until very recently. Okay? Hate crimes, I don't find this very useful because sectarianism gets lumped with crimes towards people who are disabled, race crimes, sexual crimes, transgender identity crimes. It doesn't make sense to me, and we're never at any point told what a hate crime is. So I've reconceptualized it. I think sectarianism is a serious social problem. Now, in sociological understanding, that means social problems are threatening, distressing, bad. They can be short-term or long-term. Interesting, they can affect a few people, but when they do, it tends to be a significant people who make a difference. More typically, they affect a number of people. Some may be universal, alcohol, drug abuse, and they're complex. It's very difficult to get to the actual root causes of social problems, serious social problems. The second thing, and I'm going to run out of time, but I want to do it very quickly. I think also we have no understanding of the development of this social problem. So, there are three phases in a social problem: awareness, policy determination, and reform. Awareness is where people suddenly start to draw attention to the problem. Policy determination is discussion. How are we going to resolve this social problem? And reform is when legal action is taken, when laws are enacted or brought into force to tackle the social problems. These are not mutually exclusive, they're not linear, they're probably more cyclical. So, applying the phases to sectarianism in Scotland, what happens? In the late 1980s, we have into the 90s, four major points. The Celtic and Rangers fans, we all know who they are, riot. This caused major public upset. You can't have major public unrest. Number two Celtic fans are murdered for what appears to be sectarian-related crime. Number three, this will sound odd. Donald Finlay was one of the leading lawyers who was caught singing anti-Catholic songs in a pub or a club and had to then leave the club of Rangers. And finally, James Macmillan, the classical composer, decides to speak at the Edinburgh Festival about sectarianism. So suddenly, people become aware. This last point, this lecture, causes a huge furore in the press, in the media, and this goes on for several years. Policy determination. Again, it's prompted by riots between football fans. And we have then this document produced looking at academic research evidence. We then have a summit called by the First Minister where he invites politicians, religious leaders, football clubs to come and meet to talk about this. They identify 4 key themes: interfaith work, education, sport, and marches and parades. And finally, we come to reform. Legislation is brought into force. It's now illegal to engage in any sectarian motivated crime, though how you prove that is very difficult. Very difficult, as I'm going to explain in a minute. We've also got another major survey of research evidence, which actually really returns to the first one. We then have a major report conducted by an academic from Northern Ireland. Final points. The evidence of a perception of sectarianism is very common in Scotland. All the research evidence tells us that people perceive this as, in my words, a serious social problem. However, very few people, according to research evidence, have experienced any sectarian activity towards them. And that's a really important point. Second point, 50% of all sectarian crime is committed against a member of the police force, usually by somebody who's being arrested. And finally, if we're going to pursue this discussion about sectarianism, we need a greater clarity of understanding of what sectarianism is. We need to understand how it manifests itself, and we need to understand how it can be tackled. Okay? Wow, how's that? Eh? Wow. Not bad. Right. Yep. Yeah. By the way, we're offering. Just ladies and gentlemen, we're offering air miles this afternoon with everybody who stays the course. Okay.
Should the state continue to fund Catholic schools in Scotland in the 21st century? And with Stephen McKinn, we have also struck more.
Who does exist? He's very gorgeous, isn't he?
15 minutes.
15 minutes. Okay, right. Let's go. Okay, what is Scotland like? What is our school system like? We have a state-funded national system. We have 3 types of schooling. They educate 676,000 pupils. We have non-denominational schools. We have denominational schools and special schools for children who need support. We also have early learning centres. Most of the schools, 2,182, are non-denominational, but there are 373 denominational schools. Now let me be quite clear, everybody. These are completely state-funded and have been since 1918. So they are not an adjunct or extra to the national state-funded system. They are integral to the state-funded. This is very different from many other parts of Europe. They are completely state-funded. Of these 373, we have 369 Catholic, 3 Episcopalian, and 1 Jewish primary school. So the vast majority are Catholic schools. The vast majority are located in the areas that these Irish Catholics in the mid-19th century settled. I'm not going to go over all of this. It's just to show that we've done the work. It's pretty much the same story. The migrants come, and when they come in numbers in the mid-19th century, they become concerned. What do migrants do? What are the things? We've talked a lot today about identity. It's very, very important. We've talked about migrants. We tend to call them new arrivals now. What do you hold on to? Your culture, your nationality, also your religion, because these things are important to you. These are what make you different from the country you have come to. But when you have got a different religion and that religion is under attack, then you look for forms of ways in which you can educate your children. So they found the schooling. There were a small number of Catholic schools. They wanted to retain religious identity in their children. So they moved very quickly to found many more Catholic schools because they felt their children would be assimilated into the Protestant culture. Now this is the same problem, the same challenge that many other migrant or new arrival people face going to different countries. If there's a form of religious schooling, either they're willing to accept it or they're a bit anxious about it. The schools grew very quickly. However, because the state didn't have a national system, they had to fund them themselves. This very poor community had to fund the schools themselves. The schools were poor, they were overcrowded, teachers were paid poorly, there were no resources. The best schools were run by religious orders, by Jesuits, by orders from Italy. They were the best schools in the country, but it was a very, very poor system. Attendance, always a difficulty. One of the things we all forget, national school systems don't kick into the late 19th century, early 20th century. If we're going to be really careful with the academics, you don't get anything like a large number of children attending school after the Second World War, because most children are still needed to work, and most children are doing other things. I'm going to jump to the 1980 Education Act, where after a long period of negotiation, a long period of wrangling, the state decides that it will give or grant the Catholic and Episcopalian churches what they want. Now, again, we're back into this question. What are you going to do? You've You have founded a state school system. It's going to be funded centrally. You have a large number of schools that are not as good, poorly resourced, etc., etc. What do? You've got a large number of children who are not being educated properly. So eventually, in a very egalitarian style, they were invited to join the state system, but retain denominational status, retain their own religious education, retain their own teachers. Over the years, the schools grew, and in the late 60s, 70s, major changes impacted on Scottish society. Number one, the schools changed from being junior secondary up to the age 14, and then senior, to everybody is in the same school. You're not allowed to leave school till you're 16, makes a big difference. Multinationals appear, employment opportunities are available for all, and then the crucial point, and we are examples of this. Higher education becomes free for everybody. Not only that, they give you a grant to go, they pay you to go. Now that stopped, but it meant a huge influx of people being able to go to university, to become socially mobile. However, Catholic schools in this country, where we've talked about sectarianism, which I still maintain is more perception than reality, so Catholic schools are perceived as divisive, as all faith schools are. They're perceived as indoctrinatory, where children are brought into a climate, a culture of belief that they may or may not want to follow. And finally, of course, they're presumed to be related to sectarianism. This is across Europe. At the moment, there are major debates, and we've just contributed to a special edition of a journal that's been talking about this. The debate across Europe is, if you have religious schools partially or fully state-funded in your system, should you not tolerate them? Should you tolerate them? Should you recognize them even? And should you give them any form of state funding? Now this is all across Europe. Of course, in Scotland, in the UK, the humanists and the secular society are saying, no, we shouldn't tolerate them, because we shouldn't have a school based on a set of religious beliefs. There's a possibility of indoctrination. They're not totally inclusive. There should be no separate curriculum. I don't have time to go into all the arguments. Let's just take the human rights arguments. Many people in Scotland use this argument, which I find quite difficult, actually. They use the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and they use the first protocol to say that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that should be given to their children, and protocol added in 52 is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. What most people promoting this argument don't realize is the UK has a reservation, which is only so far as it's compatible with the provision of efficient instruction and training, and most importantly, the avoidance of unreasonable expenditure. Now, skip that one. That takes us into what I call, my way of explaining this is an ideological stalemate. Those who promote faith schools will say it is a reasonable expense. It defends their rights. It ensures greater democratic inclusion. Those who oppose will say it's unreasonable, it's an unnecessary expense, it privileges certain parents and religious groups, it's divisive. Okay, now I'm going to be really, really cheeky. I'm going to change the question, because I think the question is a wrong question, because that takes us nowhere. The question is, why does the state continue to fund Catholic schools? And why does the state continue to be uninfluenced by the secular and humanist lobby to the extent that the secularists and humanists are complaining about the state? Okay, why? Why has the First Minister, who you will all know because of the referendum last year, Alex Salmond, one quick joke, have I got time? How much time have we got left?
You have
7 minutes, okay. In the past, ladies and gentlemen, there used to be a joke in Glasgow. You never ask somebody, 2 questions you don't ask. Number 1, what team do you support? Number 2, are you looking at my girlfriend? And before the referendum, we added a third. What team do you support? Are you looking at my girlfriend, and how are you voting in the referendum? That became the third question you don't ask. However, this is really, really important because the First Minister, up until the SNP government, the political support for Catholic schools, despite being funded by the government, could best be described as an uneasy tolerance, my words, uneasy tolerance, a kind of begrudged acceptance that these schools were quite good schools. Alex Salmond changed all that. He came along to the University of Glasgow, a public lecture attended by hundreds of people, televised, to say Catholic schools were wonderful and a great part of the Scottish education system. So he moved from uneasy tolerance to recognition in 1 hour. Not only recognition, he moved to public support. Now, why did he do that? He's a politician. This support is consistent with the inclusive approach that his party has adopted to Scottish society. What the politicians across the UK, I can't speak for the rest of Europe, have realized is religious groups can be quite powerful. They can be very powerful lobby groups, but they also represent a significant number of voters. You do not want to alienate a religious group. You do not want to interfere too much in education either, because that's a vote loser as well. It's very consistent with, since the 1990s, using faith as a political resource to help realize community inclusion. So we can understand it as that way, we can understand it as political expediency. Finished. Do you want to add anything? No? Fine, okay. Okay. 2 minutes? 5 minutes? Oh, wow, great. Yeah. Challenges, we want some challenges, yeah. It's been a long day. Yes.
So the new arrived were stigmatized as the beginning of the problem, and so the newcomers, in some sense, liberate the ancient one from the stigma. So the stigma was all put on the newcomers.
I'll just comment on that. I've gone over the story very quickly. We spent a lot of time writing this up and thinking about it. Let me pose a kind of question that I pose to many people. We in the 2000s, we brought 10,000 Eastern European migrants that were actually refugees and asylum seekers into Glasgow. We put them in the worst possible housing we could find, and the only words I can use is all hell broke loose in the city. Take the city of Glasgow, a tenth of the size it is now, 1/10. Already dangerously overcrowded, 10 people in small apartments, and bring in between 250,000 people and maybe 400,000 people over a 1 to 2 year period. Clearly, the social infrastructure just cannot cope with this. And so it's partly to do with the religion, it's partly to do with the ethnicity, it's also partly to do with the social problem it creates. Yeah? And again, they were in the poorest housing available. Say anything? No, you okay?
Yeah, I might suggest that coming to Glasgow and some of the friendly cities that we're looking
Okay. My co-presenter has also said to me that when you come to Glasgow, it's the friendliest city in the world, and that you'll be very, very welcome. But don't go to a football game. Yes.
It's very, very interesting for me, as it remembers me also other parts of the world where religious factor becomes very, people are attached to the religion because it helps in defining
Yeah.
in another country.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's broaden it out because I've done some work on the Muslim, Jewish, and other religions in Scotland. What I've discovered is pretty much the same. That when they come to the country, they may face challenges. They may not face major challenges, but the pattern is very similar. Retaining identity always involves retaining religious identity. Where it becomes more challenging is second, third generations. That's when it becomes, and Federico wrote a brilliant article in our edited journal from the University of Bologna, brilliant article about the different ways that second, third generation children perceive their religious identity. Some not particularly observant, some just some kind of affiliation, but it was important to all of them. It was important because it's still part of this identity that marks them out as distinctive and different from Italians. It's the same in Scotland. So the Muslim, we talk about the Muslims as if they're homogeneous. We talk about them as if we've got this big group of Muslims. No, no, no. They're very varied, from devout Muslims to Muslims who really only hold on to the label, second, third generations, who really, and really don't care much about what goes on in the mosque or what's actually even going on in Syria. They're just Muslim by name. Okay?
Thank you so much. So let's invite the next
Basil's first.
group of speakers, which
Federico,
are
yeah.
Professor from Pakistan. And Federico Zanoni, University of Bologna.
Yeah,
And I guess you would like to stay near to the
yeah.
computers, to the slides.
Sorry for this.
And then we have 30 minutes for this presentation and then common discussion over
Want me to start?
the board
Okay.
presentation.
Okay.
He's the leader of the
Can I just have the abstract?
yeah, of course.
Okay, I did say there were frequent flyer air miles with this. So we'll slow down now because this is a wonderful opportunity for us to hear different people speaking on the same theme, but discussing it in relation to different geographical contexts. We wanted, when the Allmeet group met, a wonderful meeting up in North Arctic Circle, it was wonderful. We wanted to do something that was transnational. So Vasil is from Russia, Federico is from Italy, and I'm obviously from Scotland. We wanted to look at the way in which what kind of challenges do migrants face? Are they going to integrate? Are they going to be assimilated? And how can this be resolved? What kind of dialogue or what kind of solutions can be found to help migrants find their way within a particular situation? Now, in a sense, this is work in progress. We've just started in this. It's a journey. We want to go further. But I think you'll find this very interesting because already we're beginning to discern common themes from these three very, very different countries and from different cities.
Federico, where is my presentation?
Because of all these Arctic beauties now, glacial.
Good afternoon again. I come back and I want to. Yeah. This is not panel of Steven. only. Yeah, and I want to explain our common research about interreligious dialogue in three different countries, three different regions, and my case is case of Tatarstan, interreligious dialogue in Tatarstan. The first one is a general introduction in demographics of Tatarstan. The number of total population, 3,500,000 people. It is only 2.7% of total population, our country, and only 0.4% of total area of Russia. Kazan is the capital of Tatarstan, is the 6th place among the biggest Russian cities. Next one, ethnic structure of population of Tatarstan. You can see the result of census from since 1979, and you can see that the ethnic structure of Tatarstan is changed. The share of ethnic Tatars is increased, the share of ethnic Russian decreased, and Tatars became a majority in our republic. It is a new image, new character of our republic now, and this trend will continue in future. So you can see a forecast. Next one, ethnic cultural diversity. We have more than 100 nationalities in our republic, and the 8 nationalities have a population more than 10,000. You can see the ethnic structure, more detailed ethnic structure. I can see the Tatars, Kryazhin Tatars. Kryazhin Tatar is a Tatar who Orthodox, not Muslim. The most religion for Tatar is Islam, but Kryazhin Tatar is Orthodox. And Russian, Chuvash, and other. I return to problem of Kryazhin Tatars because it is a very interesting aspect of interreligious situation. Changes of ethnic structure, population, main cities. You can see that last time in 20th century, the Russians was a majority in main cities of Tatarstan. But the situation in change during last 10-20 years, and only in Kazan, ethnic Russian is a majority. But in rest cities, main cities, Tatar is a majority now. And you can see the level of urbanization. The level of urbanization of Tatars is less than Russian. So we can forecast the new urbanization of Tatars, and so the number of Tatar in cities will decrease, will increase in future. The introduction in interreligious relation of Tatarstan. Tatarstan is very interesting region. Religious structure of republic. We have not detailed information about religious structure. We can say only about ethnic Muslims and ethnic Orthodoxes. Tatars is ethnic Muslims, and share of ethnic Orthodox included ethnic Russian, and Kryazhin Tatars, and other ethnic groups who most Orthodoxes: Chuvash, Udmurts, Maris, and other. And you can see that religious structure population, our republic, is changed, and yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, and ethnic number of Muslims is increased. Level of religiosity of different ethnic groups. After the collapse of USSR, we have a strong growth of believers. You can see it's a growth in 3 times during 20 years. But strong believers is a minority, only 10%. For example, for Muslim who made 5 years a day and other rules is only 10%, and the Orthodox is the same. Number of Russian Tatars is a political aspect because we have a different estimates of number Russian Tatars. You can see 1% or 10%. If we join to ethnic Orthodoxies, Orthodoxies became a majority in our republic. If we don't use this estimate, ethnic Muslim is majority. So it's a political question. Imbalance in the religious sphere. You can see we have an imbalance, and it is provoke tensions between Orthodoxies and Muslim, because number of Orthodox churches is less than 4 times, but the number of Orthodoxies is not so small. Imbalance in public sphere is the same situation, and the Tatars is a dominant group in political elite in political sphere, and it have a religious structure too. Okay, migration promotes this situation because the most the main flows from Central Asia country, and it is Muslim population. Origin of the interreligious situation in Tatarstan. Very quickly. Our region had the first Muslim state in Middle Age. The name it Volskaya Bulgaria. And you can see monuments from this time. When our region was joined to Russian state, and we have a mix of religions, you can see there's mosque and behind the Orthodox Church, like Jerusalem maybe. You can see Kazan icon is a main symbol of Russian Orthodoxy from Kazan. During Soviet time, we had a strong atheistic ideology and pricing of religion. Next time, current situation, contemporary. We can see as data of PIF Center from USA. You can see a growth of religious group in Russia, the same in Tatarstan, and we have a religion restrictions index from PIF Center. Government restriction index and social hostility index involved in religion conflicts. You can see that strong growth of this index in Russia, and last several years. One minute, okay. Yeah, yeah, and the PERF Center estimate Russian religious situation as very dangerous. You can see this situation is this top list of most populous country with high level of hostility, religion hostility. Next one, result of sociological poll about religion situation in Tatarstan. The most population think that is general quite stable. Interreligious dialogue in Tatarstan. one minute. No, okay, it's interesting because we have a strong mix of religion. You can see a Kazan Kremlin. On one side is a mosque. On the opposite side is the Orthodox Church. 2 main monuments who provide by state foundation. You can see the dialogue on the high institutional level. All representatives of all religion sitting together and also sleeping together sometimes. Yes. No, you can see. Yes. No, it's clear. Not. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, but
It's okay.
I give a private answer if you have any questions after this session. because very terrible management and yes, my time. Yeah. And
It's okay.
But you speak in your first language.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
is an advantage for
Okay, I don't need the full time. Just want to have a look at the census, the demographics. We're talking about the city of Glasgow now, not just Scotland. And this becomes very interesting because when we talk about the Catholic population, as I said earlier, where they'd settled, you'll see that the Roman Catholic population of Glasgow is much higher than the Scottish average. The Church of Scotland's down. But it becomes even more interesting when we look at Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, and Jews, especially the Muslims. Almost a half of the Muslim population are in the city of Glasgow. Now, I've highlighted the Jewish figure in red because the Jewish figure and the Muslim figure in particular, when we talk about the city of Glasgow, they use very strict delineation. But in fact, if you go to the greater Glasgow area, you're talking about 1.5 million people, and that rate of Jews will rise to 5,000. And the Muslims, you'll probably find add on another 20,000 Muslims in there. So in the city of Glasgow, these were the populations, but in the environ, in other words, the wider group, is much bigger. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Jews, I'll just talk about the Muslims. I don't really have much time. The Muslim community in Scotland is very interesting. There were one or two small groups of Indians who arrived in 1505, now assimilated. The East India Company is fascinating because the colony, the colonization of parts of India was going to prove highly influential in Scotland. And it's connected to medicine and engineering. There's a fantastic story here. When the Scots were finally allowed into the East India Company, what did they do? They became the doctors and the engineers across India. They built the hospitals, they built the railways, and they sent their best students back home in the late 19th, early 20th century to gain their qualifications in medicine and engineering. They then came back to India and would run the hospitals and build the railways. So we had, at one point in 1900, there were 200 Indian students in Glasgow and Edinburgh University. Lazars refers to those Indian men who were seafarers who would quite often be stranded in British ports, in particular in Glasgow, in Dundee, in Edinburgh. In other words, they'd arrived at the destination, there's no more contract for you, you stay here. And they could be quite sizable. However, the big influx comes the 20s, the 50s and 60s. In the 20s, numbers come looking for a better life. In the 50s and 60s, people are invited to come to pick up unskilled work and to join the health service. So by the time we get to 2001, there are 43,000 Muslims. Now, there is a Scottish myth. You know, we have this myth about ourselves that we are more egalitarian than England. And David McCrone, the very famous sociologist, has spoken about this. We also have this other interesting fact that Muslims are more likely to self-identify as Scottish as Muslims are in England, because there's a big debate about Englishness and Britishness, which is very divisive in England. But we seem to think that Muslims are more willing to identify as Scottish. However, if we dig a bit deeper and look at the research, we find evidence of discrimination and racism against Muslim people who are mainly Asian, of course, something like 90 to 95% of Asian descent. There is an anxiety that they are accepted as Scottish if they are prepared to conform to the codes of behaviour and the culture in Scottish society. Some Muslims still face challenges in education. They face a language and a culture barrier. There are major debates about allowing Muslim children to study Muslim religion and maybe some of the languages in school rather than study these after school. There are difficulties in the labour market. The Muslim community is overrepresented in the unskilled labour market, not so well represented in semi-skilled. There is an elite, a small elite, who are in the professional. and Muslim women are underrepresented. This quite fascinating statistic, 18% of Muslims are more likely in Glasgow to be in an area of deprivation than the Jews or Church of Scotland, although the Catholics are quite high. There is an interfaith forum in Scotland which works very hard to provide links between the different religions, to provide an opportunity to discuss things, to provide an opportunity for relationships and friendships. These exist everywhere. I want to come back to them. I want to be a bit critical of this. We've also got a very interesting presence. The Muslims have quite an interesting presence in Scotland. They had the confidence in 1984 to build the first purpose-built mosque. It's one of the biggest mosques in Western Europe. I've taken this from our website. People are very welcome. There's the mosque. It's very distinctive on the Glasgow skyline. We've also got members of the Muslim community have had a very big impact in public life. We've had Muslim councillors in the city. We've had Muslim MPs. We've had a number of members of the Scottish Parliament. And the person on the right is, in fact, looks like a movie star from Bollywood. Humza Yusuf is a member of the Scottish Parliament. He's wearing his Muslim tartan. Let me now come to the critical questions, though. And number one, Vasil hinted at this. Highly powered, influential people. Who's involved in interfaith dialogue at this level? It's the elite, it's the leaders, it's the religious leaders. What contact do they have with that group of people who are only loosely affiliated with the Muslim faith? What's the rate of religious observance now? Now, Vasil said it was 10%. I'm not sure what it would be in Scotland because the Muslim community are not very happy about these kind of census data being taken. Is the presence, this fantastic mosque, is this public life more indicative of the progress of the elites and the discourse of the elites? Do they become part of Scottish elite? In other words, are they conforming with the behavioural codes? This is quite a serious question. And is that really a move to assimilation rather than integration? How much do we really know about the Muslim community? And one of the big problems I find is a lot of the research quotes the research in England constantly being compared to England because much more research has been done in England. So at this point in time, as we go into this joint work together, I would say we need much more information about the kind of housing that the Muslim community is involved in, the occupation of the Muslim community, the kind of health issues they have. The education is really, really important. How do they find education? What barriers? Because whether we agree with this or not, education is often perceived, school education and higher education, by migrant or new arrival communities as the route to social mobility, as the key to finding some kind of sustainable future. And then the big question then, if we're challenging this sense of identity, what kind of identities do people in the Muslim community have? And more importantly, what kind of disaffection do they feel? Because we have a lot of evidence from England that Muslim communities are self-segregating. Can we find evidence of this in Scotland? Because in cities like Glasgow, the Muslim community tend to live in certain areas. Now that's not because maybe they've necessarily want to do that. It's because when they arrive, they tend to live in the poor areas, they move out into better areas. But have they perhaps begun a process of self-segregation? Or, more importantly, have they been forced into some form of economic and social segregation? Thank you.
Okay, now to finish the presentation, the common presentation and also the conference day, I want to introduce you the situation in Novellara town. And people from the Allmeet project, we will go together next Wednesday to Novellara. So it's a preview. We start from the map for people who don't know. Yes. Where is Novellara? It is in the province of Reggio Emilia, and between Reggio and Modena, and it is very close to the Po River. So it's a typical Po Valley city, which is the city center. It was famous for the Gonzaga dynasty family, and recently for the nomadic folk beat group. This is he's died, the main singer. But now, recently, starting 15 years ago, it is famous mainly because of this temple. This temple is the Sikh Gurdwara temple. Is open in the 2000. It is one of the biggest Sikh temple in Europe. And so you can think why so big temple is open in a so small town. Novellara has 14,000 people of population, and 15% is foreigner. In the last 15 years, we can see a big increase of immigration of foreigner population. In 2002, the foreigners were 6.6%. Now they are 16%. As you can see in this table, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, there was a big percentage of young foreigners. Now this data is decreased. For example, people from 18 to 34 were 35% in 2002. Now they are 30%. While adult people from 35 to 64, they were 28% in the 2002, and now they are 41%. It means that it's a permanent migration. The young of 12 years ago, now they are getting older, adults, and maybe they go on to work in Novellara. This table is too small. The first 10 nationalities are Chinese, Indians, Pakistanis, Moroccans, Romanians, Turkish, Moldavians, Albanians, Ukrainians, Tunisians. Only the Moroccans are in the same number of 12 years ago. All the other groups are increasing. In 2 years ago, in primary and junior high school, 21% of the pupils were foreigners. In the professional high school, 61% of the students are foreigner, and in the first class of that school, 82% are foreigners. A couple of years ago, I met the mayor of the city, and I had a chat with him. At first, he told me about the vision of he and his municipality try to face the changing society composition of Novellara. He said there is no single solution to take the phenomenon of the sharp change in the social structure that has involved the various aspects of life, but we must consider several components, among which we can roughly identify four: the spaces of residence, the workplaces, the schools, and the informal environments. We need to balance all these components to address the complexity. This is our vision. So the action of his municipality had been addressed to four main topics: housing and neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, informal community life. He divided his action in two phases. The first phases involved the first months of his government. Some action are the promotion of awareness on the changes in the new multicultural demographic context of Novellara, the promotion of knowledge and mutual trust between the different ethnic and religious groups, opening of new houses of worship, sharing festivities, economic and material support to the basic needs of immigrants, training of municipal workers on the topic of intercultural education and management, and the writing of the plan of community development in the city of Novellara. In this plan, there is a study on the situation of the town. At first, some changes in the social context are underlined. We can summarize in 3 points. The first one is the weakening of social cohesion. The second one is the individualism. The third one is crisis of the traditional values of participation, cooperation, mutual exchange. The causes of these changes are immigration, absence of culture of participation among the younger generation, lack of informal moments of encounter and social relation between citizens. So what is the need, the necessity? Participatory community planning. So that's the second phase of action phase. The mayor said, during the second phase, in the last years, we have tried to refine the answers by specifying them on the different cultural groups, even with the awareness of how, within them, they are heterogeneous. During the first phase, we have tried to work with the leaders of the ethnic and the religious groups, but this strategy is no longer effective for the second stage, since the different leaderships tend to maintain a conservatism. Participatory form should therefore be preferable. So she started to act in the 4 categories we have seen before. The neighborhoods, he tried to support, to not encourage ghettos. So he offered accommodation and housing to immigrants in good districts. And he introduced the working figures of the social mediator. In each neighborhoods, every 5-6 apartment blocks, there is a social mediator to manage the conflict and monitor the situation. About the religious pluralism, he tried to protect it, and she said me, I try to help these religious groups, but without using public contributions. We must strive for the well-being of the good people. It is not appropriate to send these people to pray in a garage or less decorous places, where extremism and radicalization can more easily be hidden. Beautiful and spacious place of worship had the participation of the more educated and forward-looking believers. They produce form of self-control. So he opened the Sikh temple. He opened an Islamic center. Okay, this is the Catholic Church. This is the Hindu temple. And this is the Orthodox Church. We will visit all of them next Wednesday. About school, the mayor said the classroom is the measure of the society of tomorrow. So we invest a lot on projects for multiculturalism at school. We reject model solutions like bridge classes and focus on individual projects, on individual children and classes, tutoring, targeted literacy, class as a privileged place for mutual knowledge, psychological counseling, also open to parents, anti-ghettoization. Finally, he organized for 6 years, starting 2008, finishing 2 years ago. Every year in September there was a festival, uguali diversi in Italian, equal and different, rough translation. According to the mayor, the festival allowed the Novellara to be known by mass media. The festival aims to be a briefing space and wants to make a visible and clear political choice. The issue of consent is important, and we want to distance ourselves from the languages that cause us stomachache, to be able to pursue it with other language, with our language. So the theme of the festival, of course, society, coexistence, future, community, work, job. Here some of the guests, so some important scholars, philosophers, artists. For example, we have Bauman, the previous Italian Premier Romano Prodi, some Monio Vadia, many important intellectuals joined the festival in the past. The full project of intercultural management in the city of Novellara was called Nessuno Escluso, Nobody Out, the Intercultural Way in Novellara. It started before that mayor, with the previous mayor, 2005. A network of actors worked on it, different departments of the municipality of Novellara, Cultural and Recreation Association, teachers, experts and leaders of association and of the ethnic religious communities. The mission was address the issues of interculturalism, not so much as a response to a series of emergencies, but as the new normality of our cities in this historic moment. They want to enhance the city's identity, the historical memory, the peculiarities of this land. They want to create and foster interaction between the native citizen and the new citizens, calling relation and mutual knowledge. We focus on some actions. Some of them are the initiative for dialogue and sharing. They organize, they celebrate in public spaces, in the square, in the street, some holy days, festival and celebration. The end of Ramadan, the Christian Christmas, Chinese New Year, the Indian Baishakhi, Easter, but also the Republic Day and the International Women's Day. Here is the Chinese New Year and Sikh celebration. They also organize some activities for immigrants and also for Italians, ethnic cooking classes, Italian language courses, conference, workshops, games and sport activities, aimed at stimulating the encounter and mutual knowledge. Here are some examples. They also have organized some facilitation for the relation with citizens. There is constantly updated online multilingual portals. 9 linguistic and cultural mediators are in service, and periodic meeting with the leaders of mosque and the Sikh community are taking place. Conclusion: the systemic approach that characterizes the project Nessuno Escluso and the policies for the integration and social cohesion in the municipality of Novellara provides attention to the future, a redefinition of priorities according to the changing context. In the months and years ahead, priority attention will be placed on the involvement of more women and children of immigrants, on the dissemination of public initiatives, and on the struggle against exclusion, self-exclusion, and marginalization.
We have 15 minutes for discussion, and the questions can consider all the 4 presentations of this very, very rich afternoon that were very full of ideas and challenging research data and ideas. So please, if you have any questions. Devono venire quindi questo abbatte. For the question, the microphone is necessary because of the translation, so please come here to ask your questions.
I can come my presentation.
No, it's enough. But just to rompere il ghiaccio, vi lascio break the ice. Oh, it's the same metaphor, great. I just want to come si dice, enlighten the role of the language, because in Federico Zanoni's presentation he quoted the major. I said something like, we want a new language. We don't want to use the same language as usual to cope with this social phenomena. And this is, so I just want you to react, you both of you, about the role of discourse that you perhaps touched in your presentation, the discourse that use sectarianism as an explanation of conflict, constitute the same phenomena of sectarianism, and put our attention on religions more than on other social factors. So the role of language in creating or deconstructing the facts we are talking about. In some sense, they are partially language constituted facts. What is your opinion about it?
Open one. Yeah, you take it.
Okay. Referring to that piece of interview, the mayor was talking in 2 levels. The first level, he wants to to put his own language against the language of different political and view of thinking. He was, in particular, his language against the language of the populism of the xenophobic party. So they say, we don't like immigrants. Immigrants are a problem with some kind of slogans, but that slogan are functional for their search for consensus, for approbation. In the other side, he said that it is important to look for, to try to develop a new language that it's not only the language of the Italian political and cultural tradition, but so not so understandable by the other by people from different ethnic background, but also by people with a different cultural and social level. So he's looking for thought direction in her municipality. His municipality, he's looking for a new way, new language, a new way to mix together the experience of the different ethnic groups to find a new possibilities for coexistence, for intercultural dialogue.
One of the reasons why you saw my short definition or description of sectarianism, which is only a precursor to a much longer one, is because of my anxiety about the way language can be used quite loosely and can be used in a very pejorative way. So sectarianism is always used in a pejorative way by politicians and by the media. However, if you can remember this far back, I talked about the summit that was held in 2004, 2005. They released a report, a national report on sectarianism in Scotland. In that document, they do not define or describe sectarianism, and this is very dangerous, because if you do not explain what problem you're tackling, then how do you know you're tackling it properly? And I have worked for the last 10 years trying to find a way to explain what do we mean by sectarianism, and secondly, can this word, one of the dangers is that the politicians, the media, the press, other academics even conflate. In other words, they join sectarianism with the Catholic Protestant division. But it cannot be, because sectarianism is also found out with Scotland, and in Scotland we can now discern it within the Muslim and the Hindu and the Sikh groups. So we must have a definition that will apply to all. There is a danger that we mystify the language and we do not know what we're talking about. For fun, sometimes I have a couple of slides I use, and I have a picture of Alex Salmond, and the words he uses to describe sectarianism are actually almost biblical. They're the same words that God uses when he's going to destroy the earth at the time of Noah. It's extraordinary. It's the same kind of strong language. But again, we must know what we're talking about. So language is very, very important. We must demystify language and find common meaning. Okay. Yep, might be better.
So, regarding your question, do we need policies to improve the encounters on cities, or should we leave different groups to self-organize? Sometimes this type of answer for me is a bit difficult, because I'm trying to focus more on the research level and sometimes forget that I'm in basis an educator, but I will answer as an educator. So my personal opinion, not attaching to any other position. At the first place, and also quoting my professor, research should be seen as a means to support decision making, and so there is a need to reinforce research. And research could be useful at a first level to recognize, for example, which is the political consideration of difference in each context. We have listened pretty much Stephen's contribution, which are more based on the simplifying the British model of multiculturalism, of sectarianism, or how we might call it. There are other contexts much more characterized by the more French model of assimilation, and many other contexts are a different composition of both models. So it is important at the first instance to recognize which is the political model towards difference that we are facing. And at the second level, I think it is a risk to allocate order principles of a non-regulated area in authorities' intervention. So, for example, when I spoke about the third group, the stigmatized one, in disadvantaged neighborhoods, I think it's important to train not only teachers, but also, for example, police forces and other intervenants in the sector, and both learn from self-organization in irregular housing neighborhoods, but also from the disadvantages of social housing mechanism, which mix ethnic groups with accumulated other social and economic disadvantaged groups. So, summarizing, yes, I think policies are needed, mainly regarding territory and urban planning, education and training not only in schools of teachers, but also for other types of local actors, so as to promote an effective tolerance of the different actors, and also, in this case I'm talking more about the Portuguese situation, to promote strong structures of research to inform intervention. The research area is passing through a critical state in Portugal now. I guess that in Southern Europe in general this might be a common case, but without a strong research it is difficult to have a good information to decision making.
We have 4 minutes for some other question. Do you have a question? No question at all? Okay, so we close this wonderful and very, very interesting session, and we let other people come in for the close of the conference of the day. Thank you, everybody.